At 11:47 a.m. on December 20, 1943, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler sat strapped into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 at a forward airstrip near Bremen, Germany. Mechanics worked quickly below him, sealing a bullet puncture in his radiator from a combat sortie earlier that morning. He had already downed 2 American bombers. One more confirmed victory would earn him the Knight's Cross, the Luftwaffe's most prestigious award for valor. Then he noticed it. A Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress crawled across the airfield at barely 200 feet above the ground. It was barely airborne. The bomber was ruined. The tail was torn open, control surfaces hanging like shredded cloth. The plexiglass nose had been completely blown away. One engine was silent, another trailed black smoke through holes punched deep into the fuselage. Inside, Stigler could clearly see wounded crewmen struggling just to keep the aircraft flying. This was the easiest kill imaginable. The bomber could not fight back. Most of its gunners were dead or incapacitated. Franz Stigler was 28 years old, a decorated combat veteran of North Africa and Sicily, regarded as one of the finest fighter pilots in the Luftwaffe. He knew exactly how this encounter was supposed to end. What he did instead remained secret for 46 years. And the reason behind that decision reveals something profound about the air war over Europe, something neither side fully understood at the time. German fighter pilots did not view American airmen the way history often assumes. Their perception was far more complex, far more human, and ultimately more damaging to the Luftwaffe than simple hatred ever could have been. To understand what German fighter pilots truly thought of American air crews, it is first necessary to understand what American bomber crews endured when they flew into the heart of Nazi Germany. Because the Germans were watching, they were observing closely, and what they witnessed reshaped their view of the enemy in ways that still surprise historians today. American bomber crews entering German airspace in 1943 were facing odds so severe that survival bordered on impossibility. They knew they were dying in large numbers. Throughout the summer and autumn, the 8th Air Force was bleeding men at a catastrophic rate. The strategy behind daylight strategic bombing appeared sound on paper. Heavy bombers flying in tight, disciplined formations would generate overlapping fields of machine gun fire, protecting one another through sheer volume of defensive firepower. Each B-17 carried 10 men and up to 13 .50 caliber machine guns. Hundreds flying together would form an airborne fortress. That was the theory. The reality was devastation. Crews were required to complete 25 missions before returning home. Most never came close. During October 1943, later remembered as Black Week, the 8th Air Force lost 148 bombers and nearly 1,500 airmen in just 7 days. Almost 13% of the attacking force vanished in a single week. The men boarding those aircraft each morning understood the arithmetic. 25 missions, roughly 4% loss per sortie. The probability of survival was brutally low. A dark saying circulated through the barracks. Flying with the 8th Air Force was like holding a ticket to your own funeral. By year-end, more than 26,000 casualties had been sustained. 21,000 men would be killed or captured before the war ended. Bomber crew casualty rates exceeded those of the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army combined. Statistically, flying heavy bombers over Germany was the most dangerous assignment in the American military. Veterans like John Luckadoo of the 100th Bomb Group later described personnel turnover rates exceeding 400% within months. Their unit became infamous as the Bloody 100th. The psychological damage was visible everywhere. Medical officers documented insomnia, tremors, emotional volatility, sudden withdrawal. Confident young men transformed into hollow-eyed veterans within weeks. What made it worse was the sense of futility. Bombing accuracy through cloud cover, flak, and fighter attacks was poor. Targets often survived. Meanwhile, German fighters waited patiently until escort fighters reached their fuel limits and turned back. Then the slaughter began. Bf-109s and FW-190s attacked relentlessly, head-on, from below, in coordinated waves. The Americans called the journey through German airspace the Gauntlet. Once inside, there was no escape. Fighters rotated in fresh waves. The bombers had no such relief. They flew straight through exploding formations, watching aircraft disintegrate beside them. And the German pilots noticed. The Luftwaffe interceptors were not machines, they were men, many of them veterans with years of combat experience. Some had flown since Spain in 1936. They had fought the RAF, destroyed Soviet air power, refined tactics through constant warfare. Legends like Erich Hartmann, Gerhard Barkhorn, and Günther Rahl accumulated victory totals unmatched in aviation history. Yet when these pilots first encountered American bomber formations, their reaction was not contempt, it was astonishment. Hundreds of heavy bombers held formation under fire, advancing despite losses that would have shattered lesser forces. German expectations of soft, unprepared Americans collapsed almost immediately. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced aces, later recalled that American crews demonstrated undeniable courage. They did not break. Major Egon Mayer, architect of the head-on attack tactic, understood exactly what such engagements required. Closing on a bomber formation at nearly 600 miles per hour left seconds to aim and evade collision. It demanded skill and nerve. Mayer acknowledged that the American crews who held formation during those attacks showed equal bravery. This mutual recognition created a strange dynamic. German pilots began to admire the discipline and resolve of their enemies, even as they continued to kill them. Which brings us back to Franz Stigler. Later that morning, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown was flying his first combat mission. He was 21, from West Virginia, piloting a B-17 named Ye Old Pub. The target was Bremen, Flak City. His aircraft occupied Purple Heart Corner, the most dangerous position in the formation. The mission unraveled immediately. Flak crippled the bomber. Engines failed. The nose was blown open. Fighters tore into the aircraft for more than 10 minutes. The tail gunner was killed. Others were wounded. He himself was hit. Oxygen systems failed. The aircraft fell out of formation. Barely conscious, Brown pulled out of a dive at treetop height. That was when Stigler intercepted him. Positioned for the kill, Stigler looked into the shattered fuselage and saw something that stopped him. Dead crewmen, blood frozen on metal, wounded men barely clinging to life, no defensive fire, no resistance. He did not pull the trigger. Instead, he flew alongside the bomber. Brown saw the German fighter on his wing and expected death. Instead, the German gestured, first to land, then toward Sweden. He did not understand. So Stigler made the final decision. He escorted the American bomber across the German coast, shielding it from flak. Over the North Sea, he gave a salute and turned back. Brown survived. He was ordered never to speak of it. Stigler told no one. The war changed soon after. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang transformed everything. Escort fighters no longer turned back. The Luftwaffe became hunted. Pilot losses became irreversible. Training collapsed, fuel vanished. By 1944, German pilots no longer respected American courage from a position of dominance. They feared American capability. Decades later, Brown searched for the man who spared him. In 1990, Franz Stigler answered. They met as old men. They embraced. They became family. Stigler later said he spared them because they had already given everything. Killing them would not have been war. 9 lives were saved that day. Generations followed. What German pilots thought of American airmen cannot be reduced to hatred or propaganda. It evolved from curiosity to respect to fear and finally to recognition. The air war was brutal and unforgiving, but within